Most appealing aspect of Star Citizen to me has always been the level of freedom that it promised. The idea that you'd be able to wander through a massive and extremely detailed universe and craft your own unique path. I'm fine with limitations being imposed, but they need to be done within the context of the game. So that, for example, if a player acts like a criminal, the game needs to have mechanics in place, security forces, a bounty system, the concept of reputation, an understanding of ownership, and things of that sort, so that the game can push back as appropriate. Ultimately, it all comes down to choice and consequence. That's part of the real world, and it ought to be part of the game as well.
Big challenge of the game is it's just such a large universe, and we've got to fill it with interesting content and interesting stuff to do. And the work that I'm doing on the mission system is to try and create tools that the designers can use to generate interesting content and also sort of reusable content as well.
Rather than the designers having to say, in this mission, there should be 3 ships and 2 of them should be pirates and 1 of them should be security. What they should be able to say is, hey, we need like a standoff mission where pirates and UEE are fighting each other. And the system can look up into the universe and go, well, actually, in this part of the solar system, it's a really wealthy area, so there might be a lot of security ships. So we'll spawn a whole bunch of security ships and maybe like one plucky pirate who kind of made his way in and was trying to make a break for it. Alternatively, it could be like, oh, this is a really rough neighborhood. It's a really poverty-stricken area of the universe. It's a bit rough. We'd want a bunch of pirates, or maybe 1 or 2 pirates, but with more pirate reinforcements ready to jump in and join them. So at that point, it becomes a much more procedural, living universe, rather than the designers specifically saying, hey, every time you come to this particular section of space, you will find 2 pirates fighting 1 UEE. So what we want to be able to do is to say, here's a ship, it's got an engine room, it's got a bridge, it's got a mess hall, and designers want to be able to say, right, it's going to need 2 pilots, 4 security staff, a handful of engineers, go. And our system needs to be able to identify where on the ship those characters should spawn, also set them up with behaviors to run.
Subsumption allows complex systems to be broken down into hierarchical components that can be quickly and easily combined to create logical and layered systemic effects. It does this via enforcing a lot of structure so that the base elements know how to properly interface with one another and so that non-programmers can quickly construct large quantities of content. The speed of implementation is actually extremely important since larger component dictionaries equate to a greater ability for the system to craft an appropriate response to a particular set of inputs. NPCs don't start to truly look intelligent until they can understand, prioritize, and appropriately respond to a lot of different stimuli. And missions start to very quickly feel boring and repetitive if there's not enough variation. So with Subsumption, these base components are just the starting points. Many of them can be algorithmically modified, customized on the fly so that the game can more effectively respond to a given situation.
Tony's Subsumption editor allows the designers to specify those requirements for a ship so they can say, right, cool, you need this many pilots with these behaviors, you need this many janitors with this, these behaviors. But picking sensible locations to spawn these characters has been quite a challenge. I mean, we did end up for a while with characters spawning on top of tables and, stood on the top of the spaceship. And then over time, we've kind of refined it. And we've gone, well, they're not really sensible places for the characters to be. So it's been an improvement, a slow process, but we got there.
The thing that Subsumption allows us to do is I can just find a location on 3 planets. I can find an outpost on one of those planets out of tens of hundreds of outposts, however many we have. And then I can find a room, and then I can spawn a box in whichever one of those.
It's now reached the point where designers have moved away from flow graph entirely, which was a particularly important milestone since they're now able to start realizing some of those inherent force multipliers. We're now in the process of, we're now in the process of training designers how to most effectively utilize the system. This is going to take some time since it involves getting them to think about some things differently than they have in the past.
So it's a lot more open. We have a lot more kind of opportunities to do missions that are more expansive.
When we decided to go to Subsumption, we were left with a choice, and that was whether we'd go in half-heartedly kind of thing. We'd keep the old missions there and support them, keep them alive in Flowgraph, and just make the new missions in Subsumption. or whether we just rip it up and start again. We can't have designers and coders keeping two systems alive, because bugs appear all over the place. You know, you can never just say, this is done, and it will always stay done. You know, you have to always support these things. So yeah, we started again, and that gave us the opportunity to revisit all those old missions and give them the subsumption touch, which is like, we can never do the variety, like the randomization, things like that. In FlowGraph, it's just not possible.
Working with subsumption is quite similar to how we used to work with FlowGraph. It's still a visual scripting tool, and we still have to build missions with objectives and logic to progress a mission. But subsumption allows us to build things in a more modular way and a more reusable way. So if we're building, say, if we're going back to this mission where we're picking up a box on a planet, for instance, in an outpost, we would make a little bit of logic that is reused for any number of missions, where it's something like when you pick up a box and it shows the objective where you need to take it, and then when you drop the box, the objective appears on the box. We only actually build this logic once in subsumption, and then we use it multiple times in many missions. Now, that seems like a really small little thing, but having to only be able to make that once and then use it multiple times across mission content actually means that the experience is more consistent, and it also frees us up to do more interesting things.
One of the biggest challenges to getting subsumption up and running has been getting the right people in place. I've built similar but considerably less advanced systems over the years for other games, so I was able to pretty quickly get a good sense of how I wanted the architecture to actually function. What I really needed, though, was a counterpart on the game side, someone that had dealt with a lot of the same issues and spoke the same language, but that had a really detailed knowledge of CryEngine. And so we lucked out when we were able to pick up so many talented people from Crytek in early 2015. One of those in particular was Francesco Riccucci, a lead AI engineer with a ton of experience. We've since added a number of other people to the effort, and the end result has been that things are now moving along at a pretty solid pace on a number of different fronts. The last thing that I'd mention in this area is that continues to be a challenge to getting subsumption out the door, or what I'd call the endpoint systems. These are the pieces of technology upon which chunks of subsumption logic often depend. Pathfinding, for example, it's been operational for probably a couple of years, but it's only been relatively recently that a lot of the visual glitches started to finally get addressed. Now, such things, they might sound purely cosmetic, but abrupt turns, hugging walls, and improper acceleration, they quickly rip you out of the game world and break that sense of immersion that we're aiming to get. There have been a lot of other animation issues, particularly with regard to usables, that had to be solved before characters could properly interface to everything from chairs to control panels to crates and so on. Subsumption is tightly integrated with our object container system, which means that it had to reach a certain level of maturity before we could move forward. And this is actually just the tip of the iceberg. There are many other systems upon which subsumption depends that had to reach a certain level of functionality before the system could really start to flicker to life. That's actually why getting subsumption into 3.0 is such a big deal. It means that a lot of other critical game systems are now starting to either come online or have reached a certain level of refinement, which is why I expect gameplay to start making considerably larger leaps forward in the future than it has in the past.
One day I was just trying to get a couple of guys, the bug of two guys, and usually with the bug on screen. So we have some functionality on the game where you can look at a character, press the slash button on the num keypads, and then it will immediately show on screen like what it's trying to do as a behavior. So it shows the behavior, let's say the activity in which it's in, the sub-activity in which it's in, the logic is running, the variables that are running, and what we call the personal log. And the personal log is similar to what we're talking about, about the story, because the way I tend to write behaviors is really to tell the story of their decision flow. So you can read and say like, oh, I'm really angry now, I need to go to pick up something. And say, oh, I couldn't find something, then I'm gonna go buy something else. And you can see from the story if something goes wrong. because you know which story you're trying to tell, and if something is odd, then you immediately spot it. But then it was impossible to debug two guys at the same time because of the space on the screen. So we created the subsumption visualizer, that is the kind of representation of subsumption in the game, in the engine. And at the beginning it was just debugging activities, and then I had the help of Dave Pollard because he also wanted to debug the missions with this other designer. I was like, okay, then I will add the mission debugging, and it started something that we needed. And then people really started to because now I can keep track of an infinite amount of log, not only the last 5 lines, and I can see things changing. And then we started to implement other functionality. For example, Dave helped me implementing the ability of changing variable values on the fly. So you can take a behavior that has a timer of 5 minutes. There's I really want to test it. I just want to make sure that I'm not waiting 5 minutes for the screen, that you can change the timer value. Or, you could reset some of the values just to make sure that this gets triggered again. And then we were talking with designers, and of course, when we started to work on the conversation, their problem was but I cannot play the whole mission to just trigger one conversation that is at the end of the mission. So I worked basically with another tool programmer that is here in Germany, that is called Gabriel. And we made what we call the conversation tab in the subsumption visualizer. And there you can see all the available conversation. When you select one, you can basically see which participant on the conversation are needed. And then you can check on the game which one are available, all the actors that are in the world. You can select them and then press start, and you can re-trigger a conversation over and over again to make sure that the flow of the logic is correct, or if you want to test the lighting on the game, you can trigger the conversation and make sure the lighting is good. Or is the setup correct? Yes, you can re-trigger it again. Or you want to see the animation blending, if everything is correct for animators, they can just make a test map, place 3 guys, if the conversation has 3 guys, and trigger it even not in the real environment. So we're basically trying really to make a tool that allows designers to speed up in their process. Because the other thing I always liked really to push is, if you don't allow designers to be quick in what they're doing, they will have fear of iterating. And if they have fear in iterating, you don't get the right gameplay. The idea is basically that if you allow designers to have the right tools, they can iterate much more on their levels, on their logic, and this you can achieve the best result for gameplay reason. You just don't want to make designers scared of iterating over the logic, oh no, if I change this one now, I need to spend another 5 minutes to retest it, and I don't have time for that, right? There should always be time for tweaking and iterating, and this is what we basically want to achieve. The mission system and the activities and the reputation, they all live under the subsumption umbrella. So the good thing is, and this is why we did it that way, is because we want to be able to access all different systems within all the logic of the game. So the mission is basically the core flow of the game, right? It can be single-player campaign where the mission is pretty much your campaign, and then the sub-missions are the chapters of the game, or the sub-missions of the chapters. PU missions will be completely more generic and more dynamic. And basically this mission will access data from the characters that are available in the world, what they are doing, what their reputation is, the layout of the world, so we can access from the object container structure. For example, this is the root of the universe. We want to go to this planet, and we know exactly which planets we have available. But then there are other things that we generate at runtime. Let's say we spawn a pirate ship, a pirate Idris, with a specific crew member. And this one is defined in subsumption, in the specific platform structure. And this spaceship with the crew can be accessed by the mission system to give either commands to the guys or to create a specific logic that you want for telling the story, right? And basically this is the reason why we spend time refactoring all of this, because it's just the only way in which we can create specific logic that is reusable across all the parts of the game, and that we can basically expose the game in the right way to the designers.
Designers want to be able to obviously create content for the world, and they find that they want to be able to give spawn ships, give them instructions, tell them to fly to a point, shoot a target, defend an area. Because it's a new tool and it's because it's new data that the designers are putting in, we then have to go, all right, cool, so you guys want to be able to defend an area. So we go away and we go, right, that's what they need now. So we get Tony to add the function to his editor. We then go to the game code and build that, defend an area, code up so that the ships are then able to do that. Then we pass it back to the designers who go, all right, great, now they can defend an area. We now want them to be able to fly off into space in a formation and like lead an attack. So we're like, okay, cool. So it's the same sort of thing. We go back to Tony and say, right, now that they've got this, they want this extra thing. So he starts adding it to his editor, and meanwhile we start handling it in the game code where we're able to, build up features one by one until the designers have this massive toolkit available to them to build new content.
There are like different ways of getting missions and different ways, of just accept missions. So a lot of your interaction will happen through your mobi-glass as well, so you can see what's available to you even from a mission giver. Maybe it's not going to give you just one mission. It's going to say like, oh, look, I have this bucket of missions available for you, which one you want. And the same is, around. You can say like, oh, now I'm in this area of the space. There are these missions that are available to me. I want to accept this one.
There's certainly two types of missions. There are the more story-focused missions, I guess, where there's a mission giver who says, hey, I've got this situation, please go deal with it. Here it is. And they give you an objective to meet, and then you fly off and meet that objective, or don't meet that objective.
So the Mission Breaker is a system that runs on the servers and takes into account like the player's reputation and criminal status and various other like economic factors in the area that they're in, and generates a list of missions appear in the player's mobi-glass and allows them to just accept the things that they're interested in. And it also talks to the mission givers as well, and the mission givers can ask the Mission Breaker what missions are available that they can offer to the player as well. So it kind of does all these things together.
The other kind of mission is kind of random encounters in space. It's possibly wrong to call them a mission. It's more of a random encounter in space. But in terms of how the designers would set it up, it would still be built as a mission. Just the trigger would be you're flying in space, nothing's happened for a while, and you've entered an area that feels like it needs some action. And we go, hey, here's a spontaneous mission that's popped up. You don't necessarily get an objective. It might pop up on your radar and say, there's a rescue that needs happened, or we've detected pirates in the area, but it would still be handled as a mission. But yeah, that would be more of a take it or leave it kind of situation, as opposed to the missions where someone's explicitly said, hey, I've lost my dog, go find it. And you're like, I've got you. I'm going to accept this mission and go do that.
Designers can create like timers or different logical triggers. So it can be if you enter a specific area where you shouldn't enter, maybe, and then it's like, oh, now I start to spawn lots of pirates. Or it's like, oh, you're very close to finish. You saved like 5 out of 6 characters. Now I will send you, a lot of pirates. So they can really generate the logic they want and create the logic they want through this tool. This tool is super generic, and it's just very efficient because we try also to run only the logic that is active in that moment. So we can run a lot of missions or a lot of characters.
I've never had any interest in purely procedural content as, in practice, I think it tends to feel very formulaic and repetitive and bland. That approach, it gives you a practically infinite amount of variation, but when there's nothing more, I think that it falls apart on the experience. It lacks the depth to really make an area feel alive and unique and interesting. My personal taste is that I want key NPCs at a given location, for example, to have real backstories and well thought through motivations and reasons for being there in the first place, and not to be NPC facades that have had their traits rolled from a random number generator and whose connection to the rest of the universe feels isolated and bereft. We actually use procedural tech extensively, but it's just one of many tools within the pipeline. And its primary purpose is to set up the background, the canvas upon which a more detailed and intricate picture is going to be handcrafted. We're actually taking that concept one step farther and allowing handcrafted content to be algorithmically placed onto procedural backdrops and then customized in real time based upon inputs from the game.
Tony always kind of said, the game should be this interactive universe, like this very emergent gameplay style universe, so that rather than having everything hard scripted and feeling like, it's been placed there and you turn up and it just was there, it feels like it should be reactive to the player. So as the control of power in the universe ebbs and flows, then so should the encounters that you come across. From experience, players seem to enjoy things happening that aren't quite supposed to happen, so long as it's not game breaking, and so long as it's not like ludicrous. If a pirate's attack popped up in a safe stronghold, but it only happened the once, it would be this rare event that I don't think players would have a problem with. I mean, obviously, if it started happening all the time, people would start seeing it as a bug. But it is fun for these things to randomly get thrown in. And I mean, that's partially the power of the system. If we were able to make it so that it's able to choose that just enough so that it's keeping players entertained, but at the same time, not enough that people go, well, this just doesn't make sense. You know, logically, pirates wouldn't be attacking this base. Then I guess we've done our job right. The players make their own stories as part of the game. So it's like they're flying along, they find there's a pirate ship attacking a civilian vessel, and they fight off those pirates and rescue the civilian. They're then later able to find that civilian ship is elsewhere, you know, and it's almost like they're tracing the threads of these stories on their own as they're being built around the player. That's not to say that'll always be the case. I mean, sometimes it will just be, here's some pirates, let's fight those pirates. But it would certainly be nice if we're able to start tying these missions together, and maybe tying missions onto the back of other missions. So you save this civilian, say, from a pirate fight, and he turns around and goes, oh, my ship was damaged, you know, I was meant to take this cargo, this valuable cargo to somewhere, and then suddenly it opens up a whole storyline for the player where they could potentially take that cargo or steal that cargo, depending on the inclination of the player. But it starts letting the players build their own stories. And I know certainly from speaking with Tony, he was hoping that, like, there'd be a civilian rescue mission, say. So you fly in and start defending this civilian. More players join, start attacking you, because they're playing as pirates, you know? And then suddenly you've got an all-out war between a bunch of players. And at that point, the players are really building their own narrative. It's less, hey, here's a very small mission encounter, you know, where we've turned up, shot some guys and left. It's become more like, hey, no, we turned up to try and save this guy, and then these players turned up and started fighting us. So then I called my friends, and they turned up and started fighting them, and then we tracked them back to their base, and a whole bunch more of them turned up.
When we develop a mission from scratch, we start with kind of a very high-level direction from Tony, and then I take that away and kind of flesh it out into something, you know, a mission with objectives, and then I'll run that by Tony and Todd. And if we get the thumbs up, we then. So I sit down and I flesh it out further, and I try and think of all the ways that I can keep this mission open to narrative dressing as possible. And a really simple example of that is, you know, go collect a box. Very simple objective. And you can think of thousands of ways to dress that differently to make it interesting. But when you start talking about more complex missions with several objectives, complex objectives, the narrative dressing you can put on that, you know, there's less variety you can get out of it. So that's where the writers come in. Like, I try and leave it as open as possible and give examples of, you know, ways I think we could do this, and then they'll just build on top of that, give us like 10 more ways, you know, we can make this sound different. You know, all we might need is a different prop for this or something. And that process is very fluid, and it's great to work with those guys. I mean, we're in pretty much daily communication usually, like, but when it comes to these, you know, the mission creation part, there's a constant back and forth of mission designs, and then dialogue and mission text coming back that we can go over and go, oh, we need this changing because the objectives such and such. Like, we'll come up with things that like affect the way the lines are written, and these like the writers, Dave and Will like pitch something back to us, and we'll go, that's amazing, and turn it into a mission or an objective. Honestly, it's great working with those guys and being so close to them, and it's great when they come over here as well. Actually sitting down with them and just kind of thrashing out. For example, I'd say my favourite example of that writer-designer relationship is Tessa Bannister, who is a character who lives on a ICC probe. Between the writing, the actor, and like the implementation of the lines, we managed to create this really, really likeable and like vibrant character. But the players, you know, I mean, they seem to really love it. And like my small part in that is the way we arranged the lines. Like the writers will give direction on each line to the actor. The way the lines come back, there's always a very slightly different tone. So she might be supposed to be upbeat for all these lines, but she'll be upbeat slightly more on one of them. So what I did was, obviously, I listened to all these lines, and the way I ordered them, because it was just a kind of linear progression, like you meet this person and then you do missions for her. And so when you meet her at first, she's as neutral as this actor can be. She's very buoyant, but she's quite neutral. And then the more missions you do for her, she likes you more and more friendly kind of thing, until she's genuinely excited to see you. And just building that kind of arc for her was I really enjoyed that, and it seems like the players really felt that too. So the intent of the mission system is to be able to create this. It's a universe, right? We can't be designing individual missions to fill it. We have to, and crafting individual missions to fill it. So what we tend to do is create mission types, which themselves can, there's a base flow, but they can be in random places. It can be a completely different reason for needing to do this mission. You can be attacked by different people at different points throughout it or not. There are a whole load of variables. So we create this template that has the option of all these variables. And then that can be generated over and over and over and over again. And I'm not going to say you'll never play the same mission twice, not in 3.0 anyway. But the moment you have this full galaxy, and we've gone in and marked up all these different places for it to be, and come up with all these different enemies and such, it's very unlikely you'll ever get the same mission twice.